Hi everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the Public Service Perspective Series presentation today. We are really excited to be hosting Dr. Hannah Patton. Before we get started, just for folks virtually, just be aware, please keep yourself muted if you could throughout the presentation, but we welcome you to drop questions in the chat, use the raise your hand feature, and we'll do Q&A at the very end of the presentation. I also want to make a shout out. Today is celebrated Worldwide GIS Day. So after this today, I highly encourage you all to go over to Alden Library. Elkin and our whole GIS team are doing a whole series of presentations and a networking hour with more pizza if you didn't get enough today. So feel free to head over there. It's going on from 1 to 6 p.m. So hope you guys can join us for that as well. At this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Natalie Cruz to present our speaker today.
We're good. We got wires, so we're like trying not to get clotheslined. Thank you all for being here. We got lots of people in the room, which is really exciting, and some online. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Hannah Patton here. I got to know Hannah when she was an undergrad in environmental engineering at St. Francis University in Pennsylvania, and worked with her some there with some of my collaborators there. From there, she moved to Virginia Tech, where she studied in their biosystems engineering program, but really with this focus on access to clean drinking water in Central Appalachia. And that's what she's going to talk to everybody about today. Since graduating with her PhD from Virginia Tech in May, she is now working at the Eastern Research Group, and I'm really thrilled to have her here today. So Hannah, when you're ready, you can unmute yourself and take over.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Thank you all for having me today. I'm excited to present some of my PhD research that I did. So as you can imagine, at Eastern Research Group, I don't do as much research presentation anymore. So I'm excited to relive all of this with you today. So so today I'm going to be talking about point of use drinking water treatment as a method of reducing exposure to aesthetic and health-based contaminants in the Central Appalachian region and then surrounding rural communities as well. So to start off with, as I'm sure most of us in this room are aware of, I'm saying room as if I'm in the room with you guys, but it's a global concern. So an estimated 2 billion people worldwide lack access to safely managed drinking water. And while we tend to think of access to safely managed drinking water as something that is more of a global concern, we're dealing with these issues in the US as well. So despite reporting near 100% access to safely managed drinking water in this country, we still have issues with drinking water quality, access, equity, and reliable access to drinking water. And while the previous map that I showed you depicted areas of the US that lack access to indoor plumbing, even folks that do have access to drinking water in their homes struggle with issues of water quantity and quality at their tap. So the research that I'm sharing with you all today is going to focus on drinking water challenges in rural areas of the United States and primarily in the Appalachian region, where the establishment and maintenance of essential drinking water infrastructure has historically been limited by socioeconomic and geotechnical challenges. So the Appalachian region is a unique area of the country. It's rich in natural resources, and it features a high biodiversity and an abundance of mineral resources, which has also kind of led to its relatively unique history of resource extraction that's oftentimes, unfortunately, been paired with limited reinvestment in sustainable communities. From a geographical standpoint, the region features primarily rural communities in a highly mountainous region with accompanied with, again, unfortunately, sometimes a limited interest in investment expressed by non-extractive industries. Finally, from a socioeconomic standpoint, the region is characterized by low income, high poverty rates, and lack of public resources and infrastructure, which oftentimes leads to subsequent public health issues. So the previous slide was a bit doom and gloom. So I always like to follow that slide up with this slide. So I just kind of want to emphasize that there's some oftentimes harmful stereotypes that are associated with the Appalachian region, and obviously there's a tumultuous history there, but the region really has a lot to offer. There's amazing culture that's going on there, great bluegrass, old time music, great opportunities for outdoor recreation. Some awesome folks, famous folks have come out of the Appalachian region, and overall just some really incredibly kind and welcoming folks that are part of that region. So I just want to kind of follow the previous slide up to say that it truly is a great place to be. So characterizing the drinking water in the Appalachian region. So most commonly, we've got community water systems. So this is the drinking water source that most folks in the US are served by. So these systems are formally regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. And some challenges associated with these systems are oftentimes aging and outdated infrastructure, and a lack of workforce and funding to improve these facilities. So in a lot of areas, we've got drinking water plants that are serving, 3 times the population that they were originally designed to serve. We've got maybe one drinking water plant operator that's responsible for maintaining and looking after, 3 or 4 different drinking water treatment plants. So that's kind of some of the drinking water infrastructure issues that we're seeing with community water systems. And then this is all kind of further impacted by tightening water treatment standards, which as consumers, tightened water treatment standards are great for us, right? We want safer drinking water. We want to consume water that's safer. But again, if we're looking at an outdated drinking water treatment plant that doesn't have workforce or funding, they're going to really struggle to meet some of these tightened standards. So we need to kind of figure out a happy medium between those two things. And just some background on the Safe Drinking Water Act. So this was passed in the mid-1970s, and it regulates specifically public water supplies, and it sets standards for contaminants, but also for treatment techniques. So I'm going to reference this quite a bit in this presentation. So kind of at the top, we've got maximum contaminant levels, and these are for contaminants that are directly harmful to human health. So things like lead, bacteria, those types of things. And then we've got secondary maximum contaminant levels, which I also will talk about. And these are contaminants that are kind of informally regulated, and they deal with aesthetics. So things like heavy iron or heavy aluminum in your drinking water. So something that may not directly impact your health, but will directly impact how your water looks, tastes, smells, whether or not it'll stain your plumbing, that type of thing. And then on treatment techniques, these are what's required of drinking water treatment plants to successfully treat contaminants such as lead and copper. And then finally, we've got health reference levels and guidance levels. And again, this is kind of in the informal piece of Safe Drinking Water Act. And these cover contaminants that are really only a concern to certain audiences, like children or elderly people or immunocompromised people. So some examples there, we see arsenic, that's a big important MCL. Iron is a secondary maximum contaminant level. Lead is part of that treatment technique regulation. And then sodium is kind of an example of something that is more harmful to folks with hypertension or folks that need to be on a low sodium diet, but maybe not as impactful to the general population. So now I want to talk about private wells. So a lot of folks think that private wells look like this, but what we see day to day really is they look a little bit more like this, but they also can look like this, which was a particularly scenic private well that I saw in McDowell County, West Virginia last fall. So private wells are groundwater systems that serve no more than 25 people at least 60 days of the year, and they have fewer than 15 service connections. And they are not formally regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act, which means that no treatment is required at private wells after they've been initially drilled. And that also means that they're the responsibility of the homeowner to maintain and to upgrade as needed. And this is a little bit of a concern here because there's a cost and a time commitment that's associated with keeping track of your private well and sampling the water there, testing it, making upgrades as needed. And then on top of that, a lot of well owners don't know that much about testing or about well stewardship. So a lot of folks aren't testing their water, aren't really sure what kind of treatment mechanisms, if any, they have at their private well at their house. And because of that, we see a good bit of environmental contaminants in private well water. So things like bacteria, and arsenic, lead, so those MCLs, and then also aesthetic contaminants like iron and manganese are also really common in private wells because of that groundwater. So those are that's kind of the flip side of the concern with private well water versus community water systems is, for community water systems, your municipality or your community might not have the funds to upgrade those plants. But on the flip side, if you've got a private well at your house, it's your responsibility to upgrade or to maintain your well, and you might not have the resources or the requisite knowledge to be able to do that effectively. And then another important drinking water source in the Appalachian region and, across the US and across the world are roadside springs. Roadside springs are used for drinking water or household water in the Appalachian region. And again, they're not regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act, which probably does not come as a surprise to you, as these are just road cuts that are exposing groundwater, right on the side of the road. And there's no treatment or disinfection associated with these because, again, the water's just coming out of the side of the mountain. But despite the lack of treatment and the lack of regulation by the Safe Drinking Water Act, these roadside springs are often perceived to be better quality than in-home tap water. And this can be for a variety of reasons. Anecdotally, when folks hear spring water, they think, that's the cleanest water source that they could have. But also a lot of folks have in-home tap water that has high levels of aesthetic contaminants like iron or manganese or aluminum that are impacting the taste and the smell of their water. So if you have your home tap water that's bright orange because it's got high levels of iron in it, and you're comparing that to clear water that's coming out of a roadside spring, it's quite possible that you're going to choose to drink that roadside spring water because it tastes and smells better than what you have available to you at your tap. The unfortunate kind of piece of information that goes with this roadside spring water collection is that Appalachian springs have tested positive for total coliform and E. coli pretty consistently across the Appalachian region. So from Tennessee all the way up into New York, there's been, now in the last few years, there's been some good research that's come out that's really documented water quality at these sources. So that's a concern, right? That's an acute public health concern. Folks drinking roadside spring water that has total coliform and E. coli in it, and the presence of total coliform and E. coli indicates that the environment that roadside spring water has could also be conducive to other pathogenic bacteria like Giardia or Cryptosporidium that can make people really sick. On top of that, kind of not necessarily in the same public health vein, but if you have to travel to a roadside spring to collect your drinking water for your house, weekly, monthly, however, whatever the frequency, it is a time and a money commitment. So these folks aren't just turning on their tap in their house and getting a glass of drinking water. Their drinking water, is associated with this time and monetary commitment. And then a really, really important piece of this is that there is personal and cultural significance for folks that are collecting water from roadside springs. So in grad school in Dr. Komitas's lab, like our kind of stance was that we're not judging anyone for their drinking water source or the choices that they make day to day with regards to collecting roadside spring water. So just kind of honoring and acknowledging that there is some cultural significance associated with this source. So it's not, it's not a good platform to have that, ew, I can't believe you're drinking this environmental water that has bacteria in it. So just kind of acknowledging that this is a drinking water source for folks and respecting that in the best way that we can. So moving forward, on to point of use. So we've kind of established the different drinking water sources in the Appalachian region and kind of the associated concerns with these drinking water sources. So now touching on point of use drinking water treatment, in the last 10 years or so, point of use treatment has really increased in the United States, particularly with highly publicized water crises. So Flint, Michigan is a big one. So just consumers being more concerned with what's available to them at their tap, regardless of what their drinking water source is. So private well water versus municipal water. And because of that increasing reliance on point of use treatment, we've also seen an increase in research that focuses on point of use treatment in households. But for the most part, these have really focused on lead, which obviously is an important thing to remove from drinking water. And this research is focused on point of use treatment in households that are reliant on municipal water. So we don't have a really good idea of point of use treatment in homes that are reliant on private well water, which, as I kind of mentioned previously, can oftentimes have issues with aesthetic contaminants, right? So iron, manganese, and aluminum, and these contaminants can really gum up point of use drinking water treatment devices, so filters, things like that. So it's expected that behavior changes, the behavior of the devices changes a little bit, whether you have municipal water versus private well water in your home. So based on that information, the overarching research goals for what I'm presenting to you today, for what my PhD research really focused on, is kind of based on my master's research, which compared the drinking water quality at roadside springs to the drinking water quality in-home at people's taps. And this in-home point of use water included, for my master's degree, both private well water and municipal water. So what we saw during my master's was that while roadside spring water tended to have statistically significantly higher levels of total coliform E. coli, in-home point of use tap water tended to have higher levels of metals, both aesthetic and health-based regulated metals. So based on that finding, that kind of fed into my PhD work. So to begin with, we wanted to address bacteria in roadside spring water. So another kind of piece that came out of this master's research was that even though we provided folks with the contaminants that were in roadside spring water, there was generally not a lot of concern from roadside spring users that there was total coliform or E. coli in that water source. So that kind of led us to believe, and we heard it from many people, that they were planning on continuing to drink roadside spring water untreated, regardless of kind of what we found in it. So acknowledging that and kind of respecting that hot take, our first goal was to develop and implement a simple, low-cost protocol that used household bleach to treat total coliform and E. coli in roadside spring water. So kind of acknowledging that folks are still going to use roadside spring water as a drinking water source. So how can we address the public health concerns associated with that drinking water source in like the least invasive, simplest way possible? And then on the flip side of that, we also wanted to address metals in-home tap water. So that kind of fed into this second research goal, which was to determine how effective commercially available end-of-faucet point of use filters were in improving microbial and chemical water quality in homes that were dependent on private wells specifically, again, because private well water can be a lot more extreme than water you're getting from municipal drinking water plant. So that was kind of the second research goal. And then I will touch on this today, but this is like not really the main event, because it's not specific to Appalachia. So this is just in here. We did look at recovering metals from dosed point of use filters with the idea that, if I put a drinking water filter on your tap in your house and I took a sample from it, that was just your water quality at that specific moment, at that specific time. And it's not necessarily representative of what your water quality is all the time, especially if you have a private well, which the water quality can be impacted by temperature, time of year, rainfall, that kind of thing. So the idea would be that if I was able to recover the metals that your point of use filter captured at your tap, then we would have a much better idea of what your water quality is normally, right? A little bit more representative, which could tell us from a public health standpoint what you might have been exposed to at your tap had you not had that filter. So like I said, we'll talk about it today because it's interesting and there's some cool figures associated with that. But really the focus in terms of Appalachia is on these first two objectives here. So let's talk roadside springs first. So if you're interested, there is a paper on this, and I'm pretty sure it's open access. So y'all can go crazy and download it, or you can email me and I'll send it to you. But focusing on this simple strategy for point of use treatment of roadside spring water in the central Appalachian region. So this is a graphic pulled from my master's, and this is just to show that in over 50% of our samples from roadside springs, we saw E. coli, and in 100% of our spring samples, we saw total coliform. So this is kind of what fostered this project. So our goals, again, were to develop a simple, low-cost protocol to treat total coliform and E. coli in roadside spring water using household bleach. And again, the idea was the cheaper and the most simple it could be, so that folks would be more likely to adopt this protocol day to day, right? If it's expensive and if it's very complicated, people just aren't going to do it, right? So obviously, like, the best way to inactivate total coliform and E. coli in roadside spring water would be to boil it. But boiling takes a lot of time. And if you're using a lot of roadside spring water for your daily drinking water, you're probably not going to boil every single gallon of roadside spring water that you're going to use, right? So this is kind of where the idea of using household bleach came in. And on top of that, we didn't just want to develop this protocol. We also wanted to kind of put that information out to the general public that was using roadside springs. So we wanted to provide some educational materials about this protocol at local roadside springs in the central Appalachian region, to just kind of spread the word on this protocol. And then we also wanted to assess whether or not the protocol was successful, whether folks were going to use it, whether they liked the idea of using it, or whether they were like, try again. This is not something we're interested in doing, which is also a fair response to all of this. And then the criteria that we've developed this protocol using, right? Because I'm an engineer and we got to have criteria. That's like our bread and butter. So we wanted 100% inactivation of total coliform and E. coli in the spring water. And we also needed to have a free chlorine residual that was between 0.5 and 2 milligrams per liter 1 hour post disinfection. And at least, I'm trying to move my at least 0.2 milligrams per liter 1 day post disinfection. So the idea behind these numbers is that the taste threshold for free chlorine is 2 milligrams per liter. And you want enough free chlorine in that roadside spring water that it will continue to disinfect over time. So that's kind of where that 0.5 to 2 milligrams per liter free chlorine residual criteria came into play. And then you want at least 0.2 milligrams per liter 1 day post disinfection, because that's kind of the catch-all for anything that the chlorine didn't originally disinfect. So that's where those numbers come into play. And we wanted to start out by using the bleach levels that are recommended by WHO and the CDC for disinfecting drinking water. So they already have established protocols for, if there's a hurricane or if there's a flood, how to disinfect drinking water prior to consuming it. And we also wanted to use realistic spring water collection and storage conditions. So most folks aren't collecting roadside spring water and storing it in their refrigerator until they use it, and most folks aren't necessarily cleaning out their gallon jugs that they're collecting roadside spring water in between collecting it. So we wanted to be as realistic as possible to kind of mimic bacteria levels that would be normal to see, and then also how this disinfection is going to play out in someone's day-to-day life. Our study area was the Central Appalachian region. So we started out focusing on 3 roadside springs, 2 in Virginia and 1 just over the border into West Virginia in McDowell County. And so we collected samples from those springs, again, using realistic conditions. So we used washed out plastic milk jugs that we collected from folks in the BSc department at Virginia Tech. We washed them using Dawn dish soap, right? So we're not using laboratory protocol. We're not autoclaving anything. We're not, using fancy lab soap. We're using Dawn dish soap to clean out jugs that were previously used for milk. And we tested the volumes that you can see here. So the CDC and WHO recommend 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon, which ended up being way too much, which you'll see in my next slides. So we kind of took it down to 1/16 of a teaspoon, hoping that would work out, and it did not. So that's when we started to get into those 3rd and 4th trials where we were talking about, drops as opposed to teaspoons. And we looked at name brand bleach as well as store-bought bleach. And that kind of came about because during the pandemic, a lot of folks were worried about the brand of bleach and how that was going to impact the amount of chlorine in it. So we wanted to make sure that if you bought Clorox or if you were at Dollar General and bought Dollar General brand bleach, that you would still have the same kind of protection against those bacteria. And the duration of the trial was for a whole month. And we did that because during my master's, we found out that folks were collecting roadside spring water weekly to monthly. So we wanted to kind of put those guide rails on to say that on average, a maximum of 1 month would be used for storing that roadside spring water. So the science behind it, we used a Hawk pocket colorimeter to sample for free chlorine and total chlorine throughout the study. And then we used the IDEX color defined substrate method to check for total coliform and E. coli in our samples. And quickly talking about the results. So as I mentioned before, pretty much 1/16 of a teaspoon all the way to 1/4 teaspoon was way too much chlorine for our purposes. So we kind of you can see that we really blew that chlorine level out of the water using those volumes. So when we took it down to 3 drops and below, we got a little bit more reasonable levels of free chlorine. And you can see here that 2 drops was really the sweet spot for providing enough free chlorine over time to kind of sit within our desired concentrations there. And 1 drop, unfortunately, just didn't provide enough residual, over that 1 month period. So we didn't really feel comfortable recommending that for folks. And then in terms of total coliform, as you can imagine, pretty much anything above 2 drops really just crushed all of the total coliform and E. coli that was in this roadside spring water, which is good because that's the main goal. And you can see that with the control without any bleach added, had pretty high levels of total coliform, throughout the duration of the study. So again, that kind of confirms that 2 drops is really the sweet spot that we're looking for. And then we see the same thing with E. coli. So now we're at the point where we know that 2 drops of household bleach using an eyedropper is kind of the protocol that we're looking for sanitizing 1 gallon of spring water. So now we develop an infographic, and these are small laminated index card sized infographics that we left at roadside springs, the 3 that I mentioned before, and then an additional 2 in McDowell and Wyoming counties in West Virginia, all springs that we have previously surveyed, and we know that folks are collecting water from for drinking water. In addition to this infographic, we also included a plastic eyedropper for folks so that they could distribute the appropriate amount of bleach as defined in this infographic. And you'll note that we don't recommend using scented or splashless bleach, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but that's mainly because scented and splashless bleach tend to not have the same levels of chlorine that just your regular Clorox or regular name or a store brand bleach will have, which is obviously pretty integral to the inactivation of total coliform and E. coli. In addition to the infographic and the eyedroppers, we also included this survey, also a cute little index card size, and we have this QR code so folks could submit the survey online, but we also provided the back of this just looks like an envelope, and we put a stamp on there so that folks could just check all these boxes and put it in their mail and forget about it. So we wanted to give folks, you know, multiple options for submitting this survey. And we ended up with 10 responses. Incredible, I know. But actually, like in the grand scheme of, sorry, the sun is right in that. In the grand scheme of qualitative responses for studies in the Appalachian region, and at the scale that we did this, 10 was actually more than we thought we would get. So not too disappointed here. But in terms of summarizing these results, about half of the folks that answered our survey said that they did know that roadside spring water could have harmful bacteria in it. However, less than half treated the roadside spring water before drinking it, which was not a surprise to us, but kind of an interesting pairing of survey responses there. And then in terms of the infographic itself, 70% of folks found it to be very helpful, and another 10% found it to be at least a little helpful. So pat on the back to us, right? Except that when you asked folks if they actually would use the instructions to bleach disinfect the roadside spring water, we did not see as impressive of results. So only 60% said yes, they would use it. So this kind of tells us that perhaps the protocol that we designed or the way that we distributed the protocol needs to be revisited to be more widely accepted by folks that are using roadside spring water. One thing that came up was there were a couple folks that were skeptical of adding bleach to their drinking water to consume, which is fair enough, right? We know that drinking bleach is not something that we should be doing day to day. So adding it to drinking water, you know, some folks were concerned about that, which I totally understand. So I think addressing that concern in the future would be probably very useful in this context. So I also want to talk about, before we kind of talk about the conclusions of this particular study, the limitations. So we only tested bleach that had 7.4 to 7.5% of sodium hypochlorite. So that is like what commercially available bleach kind of is. But if someone were to use bleach that had a lower percentage, this probably would not be as effective. So that was not in the purview of our study. So we really focused on commercially available bleach that you could buy, you know, Walmart, Dollar General, Kroger, those kinds of stores. We also only tested on recently purchased bleach. So bleach does become less effective over time. So we didn't look at bleach that had been sitting in a cabinet for a year or two. So that's, again, why we recommended buying regular, non-scented, or not unscented, not splashless bleach, and using a new bottle if possible for disinfecting. We also recognize, as I mentioned before, bleach is not effective in removing chlorine-resistant waterborne pathogens, so things like cryptosporidium. So if folks were concerned about cryptosporidium, for example, they should probably be boiling their water and not using bleach. So we acknowledge that this isn't like the end-all be-all way to sanitize roadside spring water, but we think that this is an effective way to do it in a short amount of time with available resources for things like total coliform and E. coli. And another big thing is that the turbidity of the roadside spring water that we tested it on was pretty low. We might not expect the bleach to be as successful in water that was more turbid. And finally, as you all probably recognize, this was convenience-based sampling. So we left the surveys and the disinfection protocol at Springs together and invited folks to send us their thoughts. So, you know, it's possible that there was some bias introduced there, right? With folks who like definitely didn't like the protocol or who really did like the protocol answering. I think that based on the results that we got with, you know, only 60% of folks saying that they probably would use the protocol, that kind of made us a little bit less worried about the bias that we could have introduced surveying this way. But yeah, given the time that we had available and the resources we had, this was kind of the best way that we could survey. So finally, just some conclusions, and I've kind of organized all of these conclusions into pros and cons, because there is pros and cons associated with all of these point of use treatment strategies. So 2 drops of commercially available household bleach was the sweet spot, and provided sufficient disinfection and free chlorine residual for 1 gallon of roadside spring water for up to 1 month. And in general, these efforts to provide spring users with this information were considered generally helpful. So that definitely was a pro. Again, a big con, as I just mentioned, it's not an effective way of addressing chlorine resistant waterborne pathogens in roadside spring water. And it doesn't really address disinfection in highly turbid water. And we only had 60% of respondents say that they actually were going to use this protocol. So not ideal. But at the end of the day, we definitely learned a lot. And kind of the overarching conclusion here is that we really need more research on the risks that are associated with roadside spring water. And also we need stronger efforts to expand and improve water infrastructure, right? So it's not ideal that folks are collecting roadside spring water as their main drinking water source. So what are ways in which we can expand water infrastructure to kind of meet the needs of these folks? And all in all, this is both of those pieces is what will kind of serve to help us better understand and address health risks associated with roadside spring use in these communities. So that's definitely something that's a big concern with the bacteria that's present in these water sources. So we'll put a pin in roadside spring water for now and move towards faucet mounted point of use drinking water treatment in homes that are reliant on private wells. And again, this was recently published, so if you're interested, this is not open access, unfortunately, so I can send you, I'd be happy to send you the article for free 99 if you're interested. But just moving forward with this, so we know from previous research, from what we've seen in highly publicized water crises like Flint, Michigan, that point of use faucet filters can be successful in removing lead and other metals from homes that are reliant on municipal water. However, we don't really know how well these point of use devices work in homes that are reliant on private well water, where the water chemistry can be drastically different than what's available at the tap from municipal water sources. So the objectives for this research was to determine the effectiveness of these commercially available faucet-mounted point of use filters in improving microbial and chemical water quality in these homes that are reliant on private wells, and then also to document household ease of use and satisfaction with this faucet filter intervention. So again, it's kind of very similar to the previous study I just presented. You know, how are folks using these filters? Do they like using them? Is this something that these folks are going to adopt day to day to help improve their water quality? So this study area was kind of split between McDowell County, West Virginia, which is where we started. And then with some funding help from the Virginia Environmental Endowment, we moved into 6 counties in Virginia. So Giles, Craig, Montgomery, Roanoke, Franklin, and Pittsylvania. And so in McDowell County, we recruited folks that we had previously worked with during my master's, and our kind of main point of contact was a food pantry in McDowell County. So that's where we did most of the sample kit distribution, sample pickup, that kind of thing. And then for these 6 counties in Virginia, we worked with the Virginia Household Water Quality Program, which is a private well sampling program that's offered through Virginia Cooperative Extension at Virginia Tech. So we recruited folks who had previously had their private well water sampled with the Virginia Household Water Quality Program and had results that had high levels of iron and or lead. So in terms of the study design, we collected samples at 3 different points. The first sample date was pre-filter installation. So this is like week 0, day 1. And we had folks collect first draw and second draw samples, as well as samples for bacteria and then pH and conductivity. And we used an approach that involved collecting samples at a kitchen tap and a bathroom tap, with the idea that the water quality should be similar between these 2 taps in the same day. And then after collecting this pre-filter installation samples, we provided filters for everyone, and they installed their filter at their kitchen tap. And then we had them collect a sample 2 weeks after installation at the kitchen tap with a filter installed, and the bathroom tap without the filter installed. Again, because we wanted the samples to be as representative as possible, and we wanted the water quality to be closely comparable. And we wouldn't have been able to kind of say that if we had folks collect a first draw sample one day from their filter, turn the filter off, collect an unfiltered sample from the same tap the second day. There's just too much fluctuation in water quality there that we didn't care for this study. And then finally, we had the folks collect another sample 4 weeks out, again from filtered and unfiltered taps, and that was to kind of look at filter performance over a 1-month period. And again, first and second draw samples we analyzed for metals, and then we again used that IDEX collar defined substrate method for total coliform E. coli. We used a good old benchtop YSI probe for pH and conductivity, and then I processed all the data in our studio, and we did a Wilcoxon rank sum for paired non-parametric data. So again, we compared that kitchen tap water to bathroom tap water for each of the sampling days, filtered and unfiltered. So in terms of looking at that first round of sampling, the unfiltered tap water, we saw lead levels exceed the Safe Drinking Water Act MCL for lead of 15 parts per billion in 33% of homes, and the maximum detected concentration was 178.5 parts per billion, which is pretty high, right? pretty high, pretty alarming. And then in terms of iron, we were looking at, again, 33% of homes had iron levels that exceeded the secondary maximum contaminant level. Again, that's for aesthetic contaminants. And the maximum detected iron concentration was over 9,000, which again is a pretty significant amount of iron in a person's drinking water. And we detected total coliform in over 60% of samples, which was not surprising because total coliform is like one of the most common contaminants that we see in well water consistently across the US. And finally, we had levels of other metals like barium, copper, aluminum, manganese, zinc, sodium, and strontium that exceeded some form of Safe Drinking Water Act regulation or recommendation in at least one sample from both the unfiltered primary and secondary taps, so those kitchen and bathroom taps. And then the important piece of this unfiltered sample data, and again, like the whole purpose for this study was that the whole purpose for this part of this study was that we did not see any statistically significant different levels of total coliform in all of the metals of interest between the filtered primary and secondary, or the unfiltered primary and secondary taps. And this was important because this confirms that it's okay to compare these two taps later on in our study when the filters were installed. So in terms of characterizing the filtered tap water, for the most part, we saw that there were lower levels of total coliform, manganese, aluminum, lead, notably copper, iron in the filtered tap water compared to the unfiltered tap water. However, we did see that there were higher levels of sodium and selenium in the filtered tap water compared to the unfiltered tap water, which was interesting. And the sodium is not really surprising because of the mechanism that the filter device uses, but the selenium was a little bit of a head scratcher, but we think that perhaps the levels were just so low that's what we saw. Sorry, the sun is. We think that that's probably just due to the really, really low levels of selenium. So perhaps not a big concern. And then, yeah, again, we saw that there were contaminants detected in 60% of the pre-filter taps. I'm sorry. This is moving on to the survey data. So in addition to providing folks with a filter, we provided them with a survey, again, to learn about how they're using the filters, whether or not they like them. And what we found was that despite there being contaminants detected at 60% of taps pre-filter installation, folks were still using these taps for drinking water, cooking, cleaning, and brushing their teeth. And 62% of the participants said that they trusted their home tap water sans filters. So this is at the very beginning of the study. But that 67% of people reported that they had aesthetic issues with their tap water. So taste, smell, staining appliances, that kind of thing. And then post-filter installation, 76% of folks said that they were using these filters 2 to 10 times per day, which is good. That shows that they were actually using the taps that the filters were on. However, only 48% of folks said that they actually liked using the filters. So we're looking at less than half of the participants. But a little bit more of the participants felt like they trusted their filtered tap water compared to the unfiltered tap water. And then maybe most notably, only 19% of people said that they had aesthetic issues with the filtered tap water compared to the unfiltered tap water. But a really big thing that came up time and time again was folks did not care for the slow flow rate and the bulky design of the filters. So over time, these aesthetic contaminants like iron, they can really gum up the filters. So a lot of folks were dealing with really, really slow filter flow rates that were making them not want to use those filters, despite the fact that they felt like the filters were effective or that they were reducing aesthetic contaminants. So that's really kind of a big piece of information here, because that's a concern when you're thinking about whether or not people are actually going to adopt these filters, right? If the flow rate's too slow and they don't care to use them, then are they really going to adopt them for day-to-day use? So moving towards pros and cons, again, the drinking water that was filtered by these filters, the drinking water filtered by the point of use devices had statistically significantly lower levels of the majority of metals that we tested for, and also total coliform, which was particularly interesting because these filters aren't actually rated for bacteria removal. So that was an interesting piece there. And on top of that, right, there we go. I'm reading my own bullets. And we also found that the filters improved the reported aesthetic concerns from the users with the tap water. Sorry, that did not come out right. Filter users reported that they found improved aesthetics after using the filters, which was good, right? So that would suggest that these filters are working for hopefully the purpose that we've intended for them. The big con was that we still saw that some of this filtered water exceeded safe drinking water recommendations for things like total coliform, barium, copper, particularly in homes that had source water that had super high levels of these contaminants. So that tells us that if you have private well water that's untreated and you're dealing with super high levels of iron or super high levels of bacteria, that while these filters might help improve the water quality, they're still probably not treating these contaminants to below what's recommended in the Safe Drinking Water Act. So perhaps not effective in these particular homes. And on top of that, because we still saw total coliform in some of these filtered samples, they're not providing complete protection for microbial contaminants. So the concern there is, are these filters going to give someone a false sense of security with treating their private well water, despite not actually providing that kind of disinfection? And then again, the issues with slow flow rate, bulky design. And there were also some folks that were unable to install the filters on their kitchen tap because the tap was either too old or too new. So these are kind of barriers to somebody adopting these filters in their home to treat their water. So in terms of promoting this adoption, we really need to focus on talking to folks, and seeing what their preferences would be for treating water at their tap in their homes, right? This is not a one size fits all situation. Improving that filter flow rate and design so that more people want to adopt these and that their day-to-day life isn't impacted by including this filter on their tap. And then again, looking at the effects of unfiltered source water quality. If you have, 30 times the amount of lead that you should in your drinking water, is this filter actually going to work? I'm kind of low on time here, so I won't really worry about this because again, this wasn't specific to Appalachia. This was a lab-based study. But in short, if you're looking at this top image here, this was a filter that we collected from a home in McDowell County. And the orange hue here you're seeing is iron that's precipitated out of their drinking water. In this particular home, this filter lasted, I think, 12 hours before it got gummed up and no water was coming out of it anymore. So that's a really good example of a home relying on private well water that would not benefit from one of these filter devices. So this kind of third study for my PhD was looking at stressing these filters with high levels of lead, iron, and copper to see how the filters behaved. And then again, trying to pull these metals back out to see if we could find an effective way of, back calculating what level of metals were in the water that these filters were treating. And I'll just skip through all of this, but if you're interested, I'm more than happy to share these slides with you. But the upshot of this is, sorry, these are some really cool images too. So if you're interested in SEM, let me know. The upshot of this is that the filters were successful in removing dosed iron or dosed lead and copper from the dosed water that we expose these filters to. But in terms of recovering what we dosed into the filters, so the filters effectively removed the lead, but we were unable to effectively recover the lead that we removed from the filters using the procedure that we looked at. And we also had a big problem with iron leaching from the filter media during this acid flow through procedure. So essentially back to the drawing board in terms of a way in which we can extract metals that have been trapped in these used filters. On top of that, and probably most notably for this particular presentation, is we saw really variable filter removal for any water that we dosed the filters with that had iron concentrations higher than 300 parts per billion. And if you'll remember, one of the houses that we tested the filters at in the previous study had 9,000 parts per billion of iron in the drinking water. So you can imagine that if these filters are struggling to treat 300 parts per billion of iron, what are they doing at 9,000 parts per billion of iron? So on top of that, we also saw some extraneous metals that were leaching from the filters during the acid flow through procedure. So again, just trying to find a better way in which we can extract metals from used filters to inform us about day-to-day water quality at someone's tap and over time. So overall, I'm going to skip through these because I really want to get to this final slide, which is, we call this like my point of use treatment rural drinking water manifesto. So in terms of like future research efforts and food for thought and like the larger impacts of my life's work up until this point, point of use drinking water treatment is not a one size fits all situation. So your source water type, the type of home you have, how you're using point of use treatment is all going to factor into what the correct point of use water treatment device protocol is for you. And in order to effectively treat household drinking water, we need to have a better understanding of how this source water chemistry is impacting the ability of these point of use treatment devices to do their jobs. And if we really want to effectively reduce exposure to harmful drinking water contaminants, we need a better understanding of the health risks that are associated with different drinking water sources across the Appalachian region and beyond. So, what might you be exposed to with municipal water versus private well water versus roadside spring water versus bottled water, which is something we didn't get into today. And then finally, point of use water treatment really is a Band-Aid. So this is not the sustainable long-term water quality solution that we should be seeking for people in this country. This is really, these are really temporary ideas or temporary treatment options for folks as we, as professionals and as we as a society work towards improving water infrastructure so that folks can have reliable drinking water, without having to add their own bleach or without having to buy a $20 filter to install on their tap. Particularly in these rural areas that are struggling with poor drinking water quality. So this research is all well and good, but really the goal would be the widespread adoption of improved water infrastructure and the ability for those folks to access safe drinking water in their homes. And really what that's going to take is resources, research efforts, and just energy towards implementing and improving large scale, widespread provision of safe drinking water in rural communities. So that's my manifesto. That's what I think this all means, that everything that I've shared with you today means. Just some acknowledgements for my PhD advisors and committee and all of our funding sources and everyone at Virginia Tech that made all of this possible. And with that, I will leave you some time for some questions, and I have my email there. So if you have a burning question that you were not able to ask in this time, feel free to shoot me an email. I am now I'm out of the academic world and into industry. So I'm a senior environmental engineer at Eastern Research Group. And at the moment, I'm working on a couple of different wastewater projects, including one called Bridging America's Wastewater Gap. So I'm actually helping out on some projects that are back in McDowell County and are working with communities that are straight piping and finding safe alternatives to the more traditional wastewater treatment that they're implementing in their communities right now. So that's been pretty exciting. And if anyone wants to talk about ERG, we're definitely hiring water engineers and other folks to assist us on this project. So also feel free to shoot me an email about that. Just contact me with whatever, anytime.
With the wastewater project that you're working on, what's some of the unique or new solutions you're looking at for those communities?
So I guess in terms of I should say we're not reinventing the wheel here. We all know how to treat wastewater, especially in bulk for these communities. But I think it's in terms of novel, instead of thinking about, oh, we need to build one giant wastewater treatment plant that can treat all of the wastewater from all of these 3 communities, and we're going to need, a 5-acre footprint lot to do this. We're kind of providing options well, what if instead you built 2 separate, smaller wastewater facilities that are more adjacent to the communities you're trying to serve, that are using the geography of the region, to benefit. So instead of just, bulldozing a flat area and sticking a giant wastewater treatment plant that the community may or may not have the current resources to actually be able to, to run effectively, we're trying to look at the location of these communities, the existing personnel that they have that can work at this plant, and then, and then also, the types of treatment given the climate, that kind of thing. So I think that the idea is that centralized water treatment is great, but it's not always the easiest or the best solution for some of these communities. And we have to kind of think outside the box in terms of, what our recommendation is, but also, I guess from an industry standpoint, just because you think it's the best option doesn't mean that that's the option that the community is going to be able to pursue and find success with.
I just wanted to confirm, how many roadside springs were you testing and over what period of time?
So, for the, for some of the papers that I referenced about roadside spring water quality in the Appalachian region, we sampled 21 springs across, I think, 7 states within Appalachia. And that was over a 2 or 3 year period. So I kind of started grad school towards the middle / end of that kind of spring water characterization project. And we tried to sample all of the springs at least twice, but there were a few that we like collected a sample with the first year, and then after the second year, someone was like, this is a private spring that you're not allowed to sample anymore, which may or may not have been true, but we didn't pursue it because it just wasn't necessary. And then in terms of the spring project that I presented today, this was over a 4 to 5 month period, but we were able to collect warm water samples and cold water samples throughout that because Virginia has a pretty mild climate too. And yeah, we collected kind of bulk spring samples to do our protocol testing, and we held on to those samples for a month. Did I answer it? Okay.
I don't see any questions in the chat virtually either, and I realize we are at 1, so I want to be respectful of your time. But thank you so much, Hannah. This is such an interesting research on the drinking water quality. I know where I live, it's something important to me, so it's really interesting to learn from you, and I'm sure some folks will definitely be reaching out to you via email. So thank you so much again for your time. Folks, we have one more public service perspective session of the semester next month on December 1st, just coming up real soon. We'll be welcoming back an alumni. Her name is Sarah Connolly Blue. She'll be talking about the state of renewable energy. So please join us for that one. Mark your calendars. We'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Sorry for the information dump. I just love springs and wells.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.